Chapter 1 of Monks and Meetings. Gratitude opens the door to abundance. Zen proverb. In my second year of college, I met a mystical monk from Nepal. I was studying at our off campus house in Palo Alto, California, when I heard voices coming up the walk to the front door. This was not unusual. We had a three-bedroom house, nicknamed the Happy House, with a friends are always welcome attitude. There were people coming and going at all hours of the day and night, typical of many student houses back in my day. I preferred to study in the living room when no one was about, as there was more room to spread books, binders, pens, paper, and other necessities of coursework on the decrepit coffee table and beer stained couches. It was a spring day. The weather was nice, and the front door was open, allowing a warm breeze to flow through. In walked Jim, a tight friend with everyone in our household. He had a funny little fellow in tow dressed in deep maroon robes. Jim pointed at him and said, "This is Namdak. He's a monk," and left it at that. A couple of pregnant seconds drifted by. I stood there, my mouth a little agape, as if that introduction explained everything. Jim had spent time in India or Nepal. I can't remember which, at a meditation center and monastery, which we all thought kind of magical, ballsy, and mystical at the same time. We were open to anyone coming around as long as they were cool. And Jim, with his adamant ideas about music, food, art, and spirituality, was definitely in the cool camp, always marching to his own rhythm track. Namdak had dark, round Asian features and wore a smile that lit up the room. He reached out and took my proffered hand. I had no clue if that was a proper way to greet a monk. Do you shake hands? Bow? Genuflect? Jim introduced his companion a little further. Namdak was a Tibetan in exile Buddhist monk living in Nepal. He'd come to the Bay Area in advance to act as the facilitator slash fixer for a visiting Lama who would be teaching Dhamma classes and leading meditation sessions at a retreat house in the quaint coastal town of Capitola, just south of Santa Cruz. Both are located over the coastal range from what the world knows as Silicon Valley. That monk had something about him. His kindly eyes radiated warmth and sincerity in ways that I had never encountered before. I literally felt them bore into me, mining into and comprehending the depths of my soul in an instant. It was visceral. My roommates and I were close friends. We were happy go lucky lads, serious students and working stiffs. We had a penchant for parties, girls, cooking, wine, and cocktails, music, sports, outdoor adventures, and more. We were typical college guys, but with a twist. All of us had traveled and lived in various places around the world, with a broader understanding of what other cultures looked, felt, and tasted like. Even with all the places I had traveled to, and the wide range of people I had met in my life, I had no one to compare Namdak to. It was welcoming, if not a little unnerving, to meet a monk in our living room. I should have tidied up. Namdak left a lasting impression, one that has lingered over the years, and though our face to face friendship was brief, I've never forgotten that smile, his inherent kindness and intuitive understanding of his surroundings and the people he encountered. To wit, the first time he met my roommate Eric, with nothing more than a brief introduction, Namdak began talking out of the blue about Burma and Thailand, temples and towns from where Eric had recently returned. Eric had said not a word about his recent travels, nor had I. I asked Jim later, and he said he hadn't mentioned Eric's travels either. A few days after our initial meeting, I was toiling away on school assignments in the living room, books, binders, and notebooks spread out everywhere. There was a light knock on the door. I was surprised to see Namdak standing there with his trademark smile and warm eyes, though this time he was alone and in lay clothes. His beautiful robes were nowhere to be seen. After greeting each other, a puzzled look on my face, I remembered my manners and invited him in, offering up tea. Yes, our college household was a little different in many ways. Over cups of jasmine tea, he asked me in his broken English if I liked the bow. Puzzled, I asked him what he meant because, phonetically, it sounded like I was either supposed to bow to him or he to me. He began to laugh. He laughed at almost everything, unless it was mean spirited, like when he came to watch an American football game on TV. We sometimes got a little over enthusiastic with our commentary, and replied, "No," with a slow rising inflection that sounded like incredulity. Bow buns. I'd lived many years in San Francisco and eaten as much Asian cuisine as possible in that city. The dim sum bao, in Nepalese they are called momo, are those soft white buns filled with sweet and spiced pork or fermented bean paste. As his explanation hit, lighting the dim bulb over my head, comprehension slid into place. I enthusiastically said yes. I love those things. I first ate hom bao as a little boy at Wingley Bakery on Clement Street. That shop is still going strong. Bao are one of Chinese culture's perfect and delicious snacks. He politely asked, or rather gently directed me, to return to my studies, then headed off to the kitchen without a glance backward. A large olive green rucksack, which was slung over his shoulder at all times, followed its master. I mused at this strange turn of events. He didn't seem the kind of guy who would rage out of the kitchen brandishing a butcher's cleaver. After all, when was the last time you heard of a Buddhist monk going on a rampage? I did as he asked and didn't give it another thought, returning to my sprawled papers and books. Occasionally I heard cupboards and drawers opening, closing, a muttered word or two, a snippet of a hummed tune, and the sound of something bubbling on the stove. I fielded random questions. Where could he find this in the pantry? And did we have that? As you might surmise, we had a well stocked kitchen. It was after a stretch of uninterrupted studying that I had almost forgotten about the little monk in the kitchen, when he quietly came and sat by my side looking at what I was working on. He was so quiet, so stealthy, that I hadn't noticed his approach until the cushion on the couch shifted as he sat down. He had a slight dusting of flour covering most of him, and as I looked at him appraisingly, he smiled, placed his palms together in an upraised manner, and said, "Now wait." After 15 minutes, Namdak rose and went to the kitchen, which was welcome as it was awkward trying to focus with a monk sitting next to me, observing me study and take notes. Try it sometime. It can be a little distracting. I got to a good wrap up point and reckoned I was done for a while. I packed things away and went to join him in the kitchen. I stood in the doorway in awe. Three towers, each with three levels of large Asian bamboo steamers, were drafting steam on the kitchen table, each level filled with bao. He made enough for a party. The kitchen was in a ruinous state. Flour and dough scraps all over the place. The cutting boards covered in char siu, Chinese barbecue pork, trimmings. A pot with a red sticky sauce dripping off the lip. Little piles of cut wax paper. The sink piled high. I didn't care. The aromas coming off the steamers? Intoxicating. Obviously, he had come prepared. His rucksack, in a corner of the kitchen, lay there like a deflated balloon. Try one, but hot. Be careful. I vaguely remember hearing him say as I snatched one up. Too late. The blazing hot filling of char siu oozed into my greedy maw. Molten pizza cheese, or in this case, sticky barbecue pork, burn blistered the roof of my mouth. It must have been the steaming tears and rapid open mouthed panting that caused him such concern. He grasped my arm, looking at me with anxiety. However, the flavors and textures and the fluffiness of the buns were amazing. So I resumed eating as the pain subsided, and the bow had cooled to a temperature a touch cooler than liquid bronze. I helped him clean up the kitchen. It took us an hour. It was dusk as my housemates and friends drifted in and tried Namdak's home bao. We unanimously offered him an open invitation. He could come over any time he wanted to, but he'd have to make more bao. And with that, over the next month, he came around often. He even came to some of our regular weekend parties, which was a little awkward. Though he wasn't wearing his robe during those days, everyone had heard he was a bona fide monk. Having a sacred guy wandering about one of our parties added a unique texture to the mix. It's a truly unique thing to have a monk cook for you, let alone hang out at a college party, because, well, we were not Animal House. We weren't far off that mark. At the time, I didn't know that cooking was, for many monastic orders, a forbidden activity for monks. Life as a mendicant means that all food is donated by local farmers, or from the alms graced to monks and the monastery by the surrounding villagers and other generous donors. Lay Buddhist volunteers cook breakfast and or lunch, and that is the norm for most Buddhist orders. I didn't know that at the time, but I was still quite curious as to how this monk was able to make such incredible food. I found out later, during one of our chats, that his mother, a woman assigned to raise him in secular matters outside of monastic training, was considered one of the best cooks in Kathmandu. In my monastic family, the Dhammakaya order, we were not permitted to cook, even though I pleaded with my teachers on several occasions to allow me to help in the kitchen. I wanted to learn the secrets behind some of the amazing Thai staples. Instead, we had people from surrounding mountain villages who volunteered their time and energy every day to feed the Sangha, brotherhood of monks, twice a day. This, and the inability to play or listen to music, was a deal killer for me when considering taking life vows. Cooking is one of my greatest pleasures. To make a healthy, complete meal for family and friends is one of my love languages. Cooking brings about its own meditative state and is an excellent vehicle for practicing mindfulness because really sharp knives with fast and fine slice and dice prep will do that for you. Focus, focus, focus. Unless, of course, you don't value your fingers. Namdak became somewhat of a fixture around the happy house, and as our friends got to know him, they all sensed the same thing. Here was an unusual fellow, from our perspective, who was just really with it, kind and extraordinarily focused on his path. Each time he came around, he would regale us with stories of life in Nepal, Thailand, Malaysia, Burma, now Myanmar, and India as a Tibetan on the lam, or how his travels and service to his monastery took him to many exotic places. I began to realize that each chat was actually a lesson rife with parables and allegories of kindness and compassion, in humility, in humor, but always with a deep, abiding respect for others. One morning I was puttering around the house cleaning up. It was after mid-term exams when suddenly Namdak was standing in the kitchen looking through his rucksack. As if by magic, he was just there. He had told me a few days before that he had kidney problems and that he was out of his medicine. I asked if I could take him to a hospital or clinic to get a prescription, but he said that he needed a different kind of medicine. When I asked him what I could do, He hesitatingly asked if I would drive him up to the city, to Chinatown. He had heard of an herbalist that would have, he hoped, what he needed. He had shown us so much kindness and brotherly love without a hint of judgment, even when witnessing firsthand some, shall we say, rather debauched behavior during and long parties, that I agreed to drive him up to the city without any reservation whatsoever. We headed north up the 101 freeway to San Francisco on a beautiful sunny day. He opened up about his life, telling me that he had been orphaned as an infant. He didn't know what age he was when he lost his parents, or if his parents had simply consigned him to the monastery. He didn't know what date he was born or how old he really was. The local monastery raised him in the Buddhist tradition of spirituality and a lot of hardcore advanced education. I asked him if he spoke Chinese since we were headed to Chinatown, where English is rarely used. He smiled and said, "Some dialects, okay," and then said, "I speak little bit Chinese, Japanese, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Russian, and Korean. Oh, English too." Mind blown. I asked where he had learned all of these different languages. "At my monastery and traveling," was his quiet, understated answer. I now knew that not only was he creative, intelligent, and the most Buddhist guy I'd ever met, not that I'd met many, but that he was a polyglot. That takes some serious brain power. Namdak laughed. "I'm terrible with maths," he said, like he was tossing me a lifeline, reminding me that even monks have their weak spots. I laughed with him and confessed I was mathematically hopeless, barely passing calculus, and I'd accomplished that only because I spent an inordinate and irrational amount of time with a tutor. We got to Union Square and made our way to the northeast corner where the Grant Street Dragon Gate stands leading into Chinatown. I began to look for, dare I say it, a parking space. It was the middle of the week and fairly early, so I prayed for good luck. We had been slow circling for a while, plying the side streets of Chinatown and North Beach, and had circled back to Grant when a car pulled out a couple of 100 feet up. Perfect. Grant Street in Chinatown is a one way, so no one could drop a quick U turn to claim the open space. The fact that parking opened up on Grant at all was a miracle. I eased my car in. As we got out, Namdok said, "Larry," smiled, and pointed up over his head. We had parked in front of the Chinese herbal medicine shop he needed. So he possessed good parking juju as well? I mused that under no circumstances should we ever let this guy out of our sight, adopt him, and make him stay with us forever. Namdok and the proprietor, doctor, alchemist, herbalist, shaman, whatever, chatted along. Their serious discussions interspersed at times with occasional uproarious laughter. The store looked like a picture perfect movie set depicting a brooding, ancient Asian herbal medicine shop. Glass jars from huge to tiny, stainless tins and bins packed with ingredients that I had no clue about, and bunches of dried flowers, herbs, and roots either hanging or displayed in cascading bamboo baskets were everywhere. Each had a hand printed sign in Chinese identifying what they contained, if you could read Chinese. An enormous antique iron and brass double balanced scale sat off the counter alongside four ancient, large stone pestle and mortar grinders that looked like they had been in service since the Jia dynasty. A large glass jar of empty spansules sat on the back counter by a collection of worn tin funnels hanging at the ready. After their lengthy discussion, the proprietor gathered minerals, spices, plants, and roots from various containers about the shop, slowly and meticulously weighed and measured them out, then ground up two different recipes in separate mortars. Using a weird little machine and the tin funnels, he worked away until there were two large baggies of capsules. All the while, the owner and Namdak chatted, a couple of times looking at me. I remember thinking how beautiful it is that across all our divisions, language, culture, continents, and history, we still find ways to make life function together. Something deeper than difference is always at work beneath the surface. As we were walking out the door, the cheeky proprietor said with a grin in perfect English, "Thank you for your business. You'll feel better soon." Really? Come on. I could have joined in the conversation and learned something. Namdak winked. We grabbed a table at the Far East Cafe, a favorite Chinatown haunt of mine that I'd been eating at since I was a boy. It is a cavernous Chinese American restaurant right across the street from the herbalist. As we ate, I asked Namdak what language they had been speaking. He replied, "Mi- Min mixed and Cantonese some." He had a funny way of rearranging sentences. "Chen is funny man and wouldn't believe I know Min. He tested me with riddle about chili farmers attacked with ants going up Duan Da. I had to ask. Pants. Then rubbing their privates to stop biting. I told him the answer. That's what's so funny. It's old story in Asia," he grinned. "Chops, sticky, and cloying sweet and sour bell pepper and pineapple chunks into his mouth." I guess my raised eyebrows begged for an answer. "It's how dance start," he said as he winked and giggled. A week later, I was manning one of the barbecues in the backyard. We had three Weber dome grills that saw almost daily use. I felt Namdok's presence behind me. The guy was spooky, though in a good way. I remember wondering, how does he do that? Namdok was looking atypically sad. Gone was his smile. The twinkles in his eyes were still there, but subdued. He was dressed in his traditional robes, something I had not seen since our first meeting. Those deep maroon robes were impeccable, draped with such calm perfection that I couldn't tell whether it was divine grace or decades of practice that kept them from falling off. Surprised, I pulled what I was cooking off the grill and asked him what was going on, as I was a little worried about my gentle friend. Namdak smiled, though not with his usual spark. He said it was time for him to begin the work that had brought him to the Bay Area. Namdak asked if I could drive him to Capitola the following day. I had a class scheduled, but screw that. My friend and someone who had become my confidant and, unbeknownst to him, my mentor, needed help. Whatever he asked me, I would do without hesitation, without question. Some people earn that kind of trust without ever asking for it. "Of course I will. It would be my honor, Namdak," I replied. I felt his mood, and today, with more life experience, I know it was a feeling of empathy for my friend whose sadness was palpable and who was destined to leave us to perform his duties. The next day dawned gloomy and fog bound. I swung by the campus apartment he had been living at and loaded not one, but four large identical rucksacks into the car. So that's how he did it all. And as we pulled away from the curb, I saw him look back. Acute sadness painted his face. The smart, wise, funny fellow who had befriended us all was completely out of sorts. I had to know, "Why are you so sad, Nandak? I thought this was something that you loved. Your life as a monk, your role in your monastery." I asked as I drove west along Page Mill Road toward the 280 freeway. He took a moment and drew a few deep breaths while gazing straight ahead, seemingly in reflection, then slowly replied, "In my living, I never experience of this freedom I live here. Now I assume duties I was assigned. I'm unsure how to feel if returning to monk life is for me." He paused, took another deep breath, then said, "I blame you." And with that, he laughed his real laugh, his eyes back to clear, focused, joyous laugh. A tear worked its way down my cheek. The drive over the hill was non eventful, though the subdued mood permeating my car was emotionally thick. We chatted about a lot of things. I told Namdak with intention that we would meet again somewhere, someday. He smiled at me and said, I hope we do that. I want you come to stay at my monastery at Kathmandu. Back in those days, we didn't have cell phones or GPS maps, so I drove the hillside streets of Capitola until Namdak spotted what he was looking for. He pointed at a house up the hill on a perch overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Dozens of Tibetan lung ta prayer flags danced in the breeze, sending invocations out into the world. We pulled up, parking along the curb. I was helping him with his bags up the steps when he asked, could you come meet Rinpoche? I'd like if you do. Walking into that house would change my life. Dujam Jigdral Yeshi Dorje. The house, up on a rise, had worn, wide wooden steps, the peeling dark red paint showing the constant barrage of airborne salt, wind, sun, fog, and sand. They led up to a broad wraparound deck in the same condition. By the door, there was a rack to put shoes, a large sand filled stone bowl with incense sticks burning, and an old stone Buddha in the corner. Namdak opened the door and entered the house as I was removing my shoes. He paused, turned, and asked me to wait a moment. He left me on the porch with the rucksacks. I turned to gaze out at the expanse of Pacific Ocean, bathed in a layer of high fog, the prayer flags gently flapping in the damp, salty breeze, while screeching gulls flew their arcing paths as they played with the wind. I was lost in a moment of quiet thought when Namdak appeared and beckoned me inside. Other monks materialized, grabbed his sacks, then were gone like smoke. I make sure Lama wasn't already busy. I want him to meet you. He doesn't speak much good English, so I translate for questions or anything. I lingered in the entryway, uncertain and fidgeting, shifting on my heels, my hands wandering in search of some natural resting place that didn't exist. I felt vulnerable. A few moments later, an elderly monk dressed in fancier robes than Namdak's, still of the same deep maroon hue of their order, but with gold braided trim, came out of the front room and smiled at me. Namdak introduced him as Lama Dujjam Dorje, saying, he my boss, to which the elderly monk smiled and gently nodded. He had the same sparkling eyes that Namdak possessed that seemed to look right through and into my soul in an instant. He also had a weird presence, a peaceful aura, relaxed and perfectly matched to his kind smile. I thought, for the first time in my life, so that's what happiness looks like. His serenity was instantly recognizable. I didn't know what to do or how to act, so I offered him my hand to shake. His gentle two-handed grasp engulfed mine, accompanied by a broad smile. It was something I hadn't expected. There was genuine affection pouring out of this gentle man, and without thinking, I bowed to him. He smiled and said something, which Namdak translated. Lama Dorje says you have nice manners, and he would to welcome you and offer blessing. If you have time, we could have tea together? What did I have to do? Nothing, really. I had already skipped class for the day and only had the drive back up and over the hill to consider. I remember saying something to the effect that I would be honored to stay for a while and have some tea with you. It came out more like, okay, yeah, sure. The llama laughed and said something to Namdak, who disappeared down the hall. The llama, my hand still in his, led me to the front room, which had three large wood cased windows gazing out to the ocean, a couple of low, deep red inlaid tables, and some comfortable looking low slung chairs and fat pillow seats on a huge Persian area rug. A large golden Buddha stood beside the fireplace, surrounded by a makeshift shrine. There were lush, tall, potted plants in every corner. Asian tapestries adorned the walls as a small stone and bamboo water fountain gurgled a delicate song hidden among the foliage. It was a light, comfortable, and tastefully decorated space. He motioned for me to join him at one of the low tables, waving me towards a well stuffed pillow. The Lama sat on the rug in classic lotus position, and it was then that I noticed, with the natural light streaming in from the broad windows, that he was older than I had initially thought. Was he 80? 90? I couldn't tell because his glow, his obvious happiness and peace, kept his age masked, instead portraying an elderly body filled with vim and vigor rather than aging frailness. Namdak entered the room bearing a tray of small teacups alongside a clay teapot. I motioned for Namdak to sit next to me, to which he looked at his master, said something, then replied, Master Dorje to spend time with you first, as he poured us tea and quietly left the room. What the hell was I going to do now? But then Lama Dorji quietly asked, in halting English, searching for the right words, You are very fond of Namdak Lama, are you? I was a little startled for a moment, but replied, Yes, I am. Namdak has become a true friend in the short time he's been around. He doesn't know, but I look at him, not only as a friend and confidant, but a mentor too. He's taught me so much without knowing it. I've never met anyone like him, or you for that matter. He knows, the Lama chuckled and grinned. He say you are guide too. Wait, what? I was a little tongue tied as I tried to put things together. My Namdak is very gifted when he meet people. He understand people quickly. You are reason he stayed, to learn from nice American. He doesn't think I know, but he was leaving our order and my service. He want to travel more, but something showed him, you and house friends. Friendship, loyalty, kindness changed his mind. Lama Dorje continued. To this day, I have no idea what that could have been. Was it something simple? One of our dumb jokes or a shared meal? Or the way we tried to care for our friends at all costs? Me and my roommates were close. We still are for those left standing. But to be an unwitting mentor to the young, though wise beyond his years monk who radiated wisdom, left me feeling oddly foolish and somewhat unworthy. After all, what did I have to offer this bright, kind, and generous young man from a distant land, except friendship without strings? Lama Dorji picked up a small brass bell and gently rang it. Namdak came in, looking expectant. They spoke for a moment, and then Namdak sat down on the cushion next to mine. I poured him some tea, even though he tried to shoo my hand away. I insisted, explaining that I was not here for him to wait upon, that he was my friend, that we were equals. He smiled and took the cup of tea gratefully. At that moment, as the serenity of the tea was settling in, a woman in a long, flowing hippie dress, smelling strongly of patchouli, a lack of personal hygiene, and garlic, launched herself into the room, followed by another monk who looked flustered. She began rapidly prostrating herself on the floor and airily blurted, Welcome, Rinpoche, with as much enthusiasm and fanfare as she could muster. Rinpoche? I had no idea what that meant. Namdak quickly assumed his role as aide and now obviously the Lama's guardian. He rose and as she stood trying to move into our space, asked her politely, though quietly, for her to join him out in the hall. When she made no effort to leave, instead moving even closer towards the Lama, He explained forcefully that she had come into a private ceremony and she would be welcome to come back tomorrow. He was physically blocking her from advancing. Crestfallen in face, her enthusiasm deflated, the woman glared at me, rose, spun around, and left briskly with a bit of a huff. All that time, the llama had said not one word of recognition, but had simply focused on me. What was that all about? I asked Namdak when he returned and settled himself back on his cushion. Namdak did something oddly very Western. He thumb wagged towards the llama with a grin and a giggle and said, "He is, as you say, big deal." I had never considered that a monk could be famous, be a big deal. I'd heard of the Dalai Lama, but I'd never heard of other famous monks and wanted to know more, so I asked about the word she'd used. What does Rinpoche mean? Namdak explained. Rinpoche is reincarnated Buddhist master with life sometimes go far back in time. My master full title is Kayabje Dunjum Rinpoche Jigdral Yeshi Dorji. I just call him Boss Man, but when other monks around, we use respectful title, Dujum Rinpoche. Namdak replied in his typical, it's not a big deal, teaching style. Namdak and I had never really delved too deeply into his calling, and at that time in my life, though I'd tried a little bit of meditation, there was this girl, you see, and a childhood acquaintance, I didn't know much. I really didn't know diddly squat about Buddhism, reincarnation, karma, or anything else that would enlighten me on the subject. So, how old is he? Are you? I blurted out without thinking, embarrassed the second that came out of my mouth. I'm not known for filters. Lama Dorji laughed out loud. I mean, he really laughed, rocking back and forth, his hands clapping with mirth. Once my ridiculous indiscretion in the laughter passed, I learned from a master Buddhist about reincarnation. Mind you, this is one of those elements of Eastern philosophy that still doesn't sit solidly in my mind. I find it difficult to reconcile my Western upbringing with thousands of years of Buddhist history and wisdom. It's not age, he said gently. It's something called lineage. We don't sign up for Rinpoche. It's who we are. I nodded like I understood. I didn't. The idea that someone could live again and again, training from childhood to become what they'd already been, twisted in my brain because I had never given reincarnation a second thought other than, great, if reincarnation is real, I'm going to come back as a slug. If we don't achieve enlightenment to break cycle of suffering, when we die, we are reborn. Other monks train to see signs that identify us. When they recognize a Rinpoche has been reborn, we start training again and spend new lifetime earning more merit and studying Dharma more. Some Rinpoche lineage go many generations, the Lama explained, all without irony. I sat and pondered that for a little while as Namdak and his master talked. Namdak then gently grasped my hand and said that they had things to do as their schedule was really busy, but that Lama Dorje would like to perform a blessing for me. This time I said with conviction that it would be my honor to accept such a kind gift. I had no idea what a blessing entailed. Namdak rose, left the room, then brought back some items I didn't recognize, placing them on the low table next to Lama Dorji. There was a beautiful lacquered water bowl and what looked like a small handheld whisk broom, long white scarves, a two-sided brass object. It's called a vajra. I had no clue what it was for. A strand of wooden beads and a beautifully etched brass bowl. Namdak lit some incense in the ornate brass bowl and nodded gravely to his master. Please, to sit here, Rinpoche asked, and pointed to a cushion facing him. He gently took my hands, placed them together in what is known as a lotus prayer, and placed one of the white scarves over my wrists. He closed his eyes and began to chant and sing in a manner alien to me, as he used the various items that Namdak had placed on the table. He waved them above or around me as he continued chanting. This was more involved than I had anticipated. I thought a quick bow and a pat on the shoulder with a sword would do it. My legs were cramping as the chanting continued, sometimes joined in by Namdak for what I assumed was the chorus or bridge. It was quite something to have two monks in their beautiful robes performing a ceremony that I had no clue about. I hoped it wasn't a fertility ceremony, as I didn't need a pregnancy on my hands. After a while, as my knees screamed and my forearms and hands cramped, the ceremony had lasted almost an hour. Both Namdak and the Lama's chanting and singing came to a crescendo as I was sprayed with water from the whisk for a third time, and then it was over. A white scarf was draped around my neck, the other pulled from my wrists and placed in my lap, and the circlet of wooden beads, called mala, was gently draped over my wrists where the scarf had been. Please to remember us, the Lama said as we rose. He smiled at me with kindness and left the room. I bowed to him again as he departed, though I don't think he saw. But then again, of course he did. Namdak and I stood there for a moment. He then said, That was blessing for health, peace, love, and compassion. May you find the Buddha nature inside. It was very special blessing. I never seen him give anyone before. You very lucky, Larry. I did something I had not done before. I reached out and pulled him to me and embraced him in a hug, trying to impart as much brotherly love as I could. Namdak whispered something in my ear. I began to cry. Namdak hadn't expected that hug. I found out many years later, relating the story to someone I've now forgotten, that hugging is not really a thing in Asian cultures unless you were family. Oh well, it felt right in the moment, and he felt like a real and true brother to me. He still does. I never saw Namdak Lama or Dudjam Rinpoche again. That singular, surreal afternoon in Capitola came and went like a tide washing up something beautiful, strange, and sacred, then pulling it all back out to sea while I stood blinking on the shore. About a year later, I drove back over the hill on a whim, some vague hope tugging at me like an old song I couldn't quite place. The house still stood, stoic against the salt air and fog, with a tangle of prayer flags fluttering like forgotten party streamers. Most had faded into pastel ghosts, but a few new vivid strands suggested that someone still cared, or at least had recently. The old Buddha statue and the incense bowl were gone from the porch. That absence hit harder than I expected. I knocked on the weather worn door, waited a long minute that felt longer, then knocked again. Nothing. I made my way down to the tidy beachfront quay below, hoping someone might know something, anything. The town hadn't changed much. The same sun bleached shop signs, the same scent of brine, burgers, and saltwater taffy, the same vague hippie vibe that clung to everything like massage oil. I asked around, hoping that the monks had merely relocated to a bigger property. Only one woman working an ice cream counter remembered. Oh, yeah, I remember them, she said, squinting into the fog of her memory. Those foreign monks? Sweet guys. They didn't stick around for long. I think they moved on after a few months. I don't know where to. She paused, then added, There's some tall European man up there now. He teaches meditation or something. He's a bit odd. Looks like he hasn't eaten in a while. I laughed then, more than I should have, and felt tears sting my eyes. That's how life tends to go, doesn't it? One day, you're sitting on the floor with a reincarnated llama who makes you feel like the universe is a little less lonely. And the next, there's a stranger in a caftan teaching breath work to tech bros. The people who change you don't always stick around for an encore. And maybe that's okay. Impermanence isn't just a Buddhist concept, it's a design feature of all our lives, a gift wrapped in grief. I didn't know enough back then to say thank you properly, and I still wish I'd made the effort to visit more while they were near. But even in their absence, they gave me something that stayed, a little more stillness, a little more kindness, a little more faith that sometimes meaning shows up uninvited and disappears without warning. In the wake those monks created as they journeyed through, then past my life, I found myself paying closer attention to myself, my choices, and the people around me. A new, different calm settled in. Not all the time, because living is still life, rife with frustrations and anguish, and that awkward scaffolding that becomes an adult offers up as complications. It does that to everyone. But now and then I think back to that blessing ceremony and feel quiet gratitude rise up and wash over me, an introspective calmness that hadn't been there before. That blessing and what Namdak whispered had landed somewhere in my heart and soul, taking root. It's strange how the moments that shape us rarely announce themselves. We stumble into them, distracted, unprepared, often unaware of their weight or their impact until much later. Some arrive wrapped in silence, others in laughter or sorrow, or the quiet grace of someone who simply sees you. And if you're really lucky, a monk shows up at your door and makes you some bow.